scientists! Today we'll be investigating plants, specifically their flowers. So what we'll actually be doing is we're going to dissect a plant to see not only the parts that we can see on the outside, like the petals and leaves and stem, but also to see what's hidden beneath the surface. Today we'll be using our tweezers to carefully pick apart the plant, and also our magnifying glass so we can take a closer look at things we can't see as well with our own eyes. What you'll need for this activity is at least one type of flower. Now, I would recommend this would be best using 2 different types of flowers. Just like animals aren't the same, a bear and a dog are both mammals, they're completely different. Flowering plants are also very different. When you're cutting your flower, be sure to cut not right at the top, because all the way down is still part of that plant and you want to be able to see the whole thing. Now, when you cut your flower, the first thing you need to do is ask permission. If you're cutting a flower from your yard, of course, ask an adult to make sure it's okay. So here we have a flower diagram. You'll notice that the items that are in black are things that most everybody's familiar with: petals, leaves, and stems. Everything in blue are smaller items of the flower that we are going to investigate today. If you'll notice the whole pistil, this whole center part, I have another image here. It's made up of a lot of smaller items. So that whole center part is called the pistil, as well as this part. This almost looks like a little branch is called the stamen, and that's where pollen is located. So if you have allergies like me and are sneezing all the time, that is coming from the stamen of the plant. So this is the first plant I'm going to dissect. As you can tell, all of the inner parts here are very visible. We can see it all very well. So I thought this would be a great one to start with. I'm going to start with the flower. Here we have our petals. Petals are often brightly colored to attract pollinators. They are insects and bugs and creatures that get the nectar from the plant and spread pollen from one flower to another, which allows us to have more plants. So if you'd like, you may, with your fingers, peel away the flower. And what I see here is really fascinating. So at the bottom, you can see that this stamen is attached. So we have the filament, and then this part, this dark yellow part, is the anther, and that's where the pollen is located. And you can actually see there's a whole bunch of pollen that's come off on my thumb and my fingertip. So even if you're a small, very light butterfly or bee or other creature that's crawling on this, even the slightest touch is going to rub pollen off on your body. Make sure you're using your magnifying glass when you're investigating these small parts of the flower. I picked off my petals. I'm left with this inner structure, and each flower is going to look different just because flowers are different. We have noses, so do dogs, but they both look different because we're different creatures. So this middle part, this cross, this is our stigma, and the stigma is the top part of the pistil. What's really fascinating is the stigma. I like to think it has wonderful alliteration because the stigma is sticky. So that's how I remember the stigma is sticky. And you can touch your stigma. It almost feels like it's a piece of tape. You can touch the sticky side. And the stigma is sticky because when pollinators land on the flower, that stigma is hoping to catch some of the pollen that's stuck on that pollinator's body. So if you've seen a really close-up photo of a bee, bees have pollen stuck all on their back legs. And if a bee's leg lands here, pollen from another plant is going to stick on this sticky stigma. And all around it, you see, are more stamen with the filaments and anthers all around. So as one pollinator drops off pollen from one plant here, it's also going to pick up pollen from this plant. Now you might be wondering, why do plants need pollen from a different plant to pollinate if pollen is just right here? So plants actually need the pollen from a different plant, definitely the same species, to produce seeds. They can't produce seeds with their own pollen. Now what happens is when pollen from another plant gets stuck on the stigma, the pollen will travel down something called a pollen tube. And that pollen is making its way towards the ovary. And in the ovary, there are little things called ovules. And these are what make plants seeds. So you might have seen plants that have seed pods or seed droppings. All plant seeds look different. But in order to make seeds, we need to have the plant pollinated by a different plant so that it can use the pollen to fertilize the ovules. Just carefully peel back this layer here to see if we can see the ovules and see more of the pollen stem. So first I'm going to take off the stamen, and then we'll be left with just the stigma. So here we are left with just the stigma. And as you can see, look at all of that pollen that's stuck all over that stigma. It's like tape. So now we're gonna be really careful. You can use your fingernails or your tweezers to try to peel this away. And you see that pollen tube, it goes all the way down. So this long part that we're peeling off is called the style. The plant doesn't have style, it has a style. We'll peel it all the way down, and you see this bud at the bottom. So now that bottom part, we've hit the ovary, and you're gonna have to use your magnifying glass. You can actually see those little tiny things. So it's all of those eggs that have been fertilized by the pollen getting ready to become seeds, which is really exciting. Now that you've dissected the flower, you can really take your time, see what the different parts of the plant look and feel like. If you'd like, you could even cut the stem clear in half. Of course, be careful with those scissors and see what it looks like inside. Sometimes it could be gooey or sticky, so just be careful of that. What I'd also like to see is this flower bud. If you have something like this on your plant, go ahead and open it up. So when I open that bud, we have this flower. You can see the petals. And I'm hoping what I'll be able to do is I'll be able to open the flower as if it had opened in nature. So you can see that this bud, compared to the flower that was already in bloom, you can see the difference. The stigma has not opened up yet. The stamen are not covered in pollen. They're all still developing. So if you have the chance, and look at the petals, they're even really different in color. So we have that developing flower getting ready to pollinate and receive pollen to make seeds so that the plant can reproduce. And then a flower that's in full stage, open for pollination. So next we have this other type of flower, and what's interesting is if you look at first glance, when I went and picked this one, I said, oh my gosh, I don't even see a stigma, I don't see any stamen. There's nothing really sticking out of this one. So I'm gonna go ahead and peel these off, see what we can find. And if you look really closely underneath here, we have our stamen. Now this stamen looks different than the last one. That pollen is a lighter color. Do you see it come up on my finger? The other one was like a bright yellow, almost kind of like a nacho cheese color. So it's already interesting. Two different types of flowers, different color, pollen and stamen and stigma as well. So let's see if we can find the ovary. Look at that. That's incredible. Here we can see the ovum. The ovum, those little white dots, those are where seeds are developing. And so pollen has traveled down the pollen tube to get to the ovum so that the plant can make seeds so that you can have more of that plant. Super incredible. So in a bigger flower, you might be able to see more. You can see rows and rows and rows of all of those little seeds getting ready to disperse. Scientists, I hope you've enjoyed dissecting your flower to learn more about the smaller parts of the flower that allow us to have more and more plants as they create seeds. Now, each flower is unique, and just like animals, living things are different, but we have a lot of similar structures. So if you can, I'd love to see if you can dissect two and compare the difference. This one had a much stickier stigma than the other that we investigated. I can't wait to hear what you discover.